This is Third Song In with Chris Derrickson and Tom Polachek. This is the season premiere of Third Song In, season 3. And we've created an empire.
We have.
Because we have a podcast and a website and a blog and a couple pieces of merch that maybe someday we would try to sell. But right now we just, it makes us feel important, I think. Makes me feel important.
I do hate to break this to you, but I was on the plane, second plane yesterday, traveling out here. So I had the little entertainment center and it had Spotify in there and it had podcasts. And I kept scrolling just to see if maybe we showed up.
Did you sprain your finger?
I kept scrolling. And I got to the end. I was like, come on. I was like, I haven't heard of any of these damn podcasts.
Well, maybe someday. I don't know. I'm proud of our work, such as it is. So episode 301, the gist is we wanted to talk about how to appreciate great art created by shitty people. And we've come across this topic a couple times. We've touched on it here and there. We've referred to it as the problematic artist topic. And we put it off for a while. We were going to do, I think even season 1, we thought about doing something, and we just I think we were gathering more information and maybe doing a little bit more reading or research.
We do that every once in a while.
Yeah,
I've actually listened to multiple podcasts on this topic.
Is that right? Like music podcasts or art podcasts, or what were they exactly?
A little bit of both. Like the one that I recall was pretty informative, and make sure I won't talk about, was a little bit more about movies. But there was certainly some stuff with artists, but it was definitely much more of the, it didn't touch on anything that we did. It's a little bit more of some of the producers and actors like Casey Affleck and
I forgot about him. Yeah, actually that's
and I don't recall what he did, but Bryan Singer apparently did some pretty bad stuff.
Yeah, he is one of the reasons I think he moved away from doing X-Men movies, is because either on those sets or at the same time, roughly, he was acting like a jackass and treating women in general pretty poorly.
So it was definitely much more about movies and stuff. So it's an area that we will get into, but I think we're going to try to focus a little bit more on music.
Yeah, there's a lot of both, and with just a couple notable exceptions. That what's kind of, I guess, depressing about it is it's almost always men.
Yeah.
And, I've done a little bit. I'm reading a book that I'll talk about in a bit that frankly is going to be a recommendation of mine. And it is definitely from the female perspective, female author. And it's really kind of a Me Too follow-up type of book. It's really interesting, but it always seems to be men. Men are the bigger assholes, which I guess is no surprise, but
and what's interesting, and what's interesting is, like, we're recording this within a couple of days of Harvey Weinstein being having his conviction overturned. I haven't seen any celebratory language from that camp, which would be unfortunate, but not surprising.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, is that was the one thing that I will steal from the other podcasts that I listen to, is this idea of so many people fall back on, guilty or innocent until proven guilty. I mean, I don't disagree with that, and I probably shouldn't, to my best friend who happens to be a lawyer, but but the point is a lot of these people have done pretty bad things, and we know it. And just, even if they're not found guilty, or in this particular case, if it's overturned on a not so much a formality, but not necessarily on what he did, more so in how the trial was conducted.
Right.
It doesn't mean that they're any less of a scumbag. I mean, the other angle on this, as we approach it, is it's probably some people we love and they're assholes. They just haven't been caught. I mean,
yeah. I mean,
that's the other part of it.
That's the saddest part. And that's the thing that I think what kind of drove both of us to consider this as the topic from the beginning is hey, we know there are assholes out there, and we've certainly been able to both experience it ourselves and more importantly, see women that we know, treated horrifically. We know it's out there and it needs to be addressed. But the problem for us is what if it's what if it's somebody that you really like that song, or you really enjoy their acting, or a movie they were in, or a book that they wrote. And that's the when I say problematic, to me, that's the problem. I don't hesitate to say those people should be punished in one way or another. But, what are we supposed to do with the stuff they created that was actually pretty cool?
Right. And I mean, we'll get to this at some point, but we talked about Ryan Adams you talked about Ryan Adams in your blog, and did a really nice job with that one. But for me, the hardest one, and you and I have, without ever consulting, we sort of did the exact same thing with him. We just stopped listening to him. And I mean, and again, here we go. We start to walk it back a little bit. I mean, I'll still listen to some of the Whiskey Town stuff because of it's a band I really like. Caitlin, I think it's Caitlin Carey is her name. His co-lead singer in some songs.
Yep.
And I actually listened to one of her. I have it on the only favorite I think I have is one of her songs where he sings as a co-lead. But it's her song. So part of that is like, who am I punishing there? Because she was always in the shadow.
Right.
As she's starting to emerge from it, I don't want him to continue to drag her back. So he's a problem for both of us. But to me, the hardest one is Kevin Spacey. And the greatest movie of all time, Usual Suspects.
I'll tell you what, man, it is in my top 10 all time for sure.
Yep.
And he's one of the main reasons. It's a great cast. For those of people who have never seen Usual Suspects, turn off this podcast, stop listening to us, because I don't know how you found your way to us in the first place. But Usual Suspects is a great noir murder mystery, crime thriller, comedy. It is just, I have to agree that if it's not the best movie ever made, it's one of them. And he was fantastic in that movie, and really plays, not to spoil a 30-year-old movie, but he plays kind of multiple characters and pulls it off amazingly. But turns out, complete piece of shit.
Yeah.
Just a horrible, horrible person. And
you really can't overstate that.
Yeah. And, and he was great in other movies as well, right? I mean, he's done great work. And there was a time where if he was, on the movie poster, there's a decent chance I was going to, go see it at a theater, or at the very least rent it when it came out, purely because I enjoyed the way he acted. And I don't think I've watched Usual Suspects since all of that hit the fan.
I haven't, but it hasn't been for a lack of trying. Like there's people who haven't seen it, and like you said, like, you have to watch that movie. I will watch it with you, and then I'm like, oh fuck, I haven't watched that movie. But it's sort of, if we're going to go back on it's a band, and we're punishing more than just the one bad player. There was, again, he made the movie. It was I think his breakthrough role. Is like, after that, I did want to see just about everything he was in, because he was so good. But there's other lines in there, like Benicio del Toro was awesome. I mean, just some, like, that when he's in the lineup.
Oh God.
I would replay that scene over and over again. It's just, even knowing exactly what he does, it's just and even the shoot, I'm gonna forget his name, his handler. I mean, he was much more of a straight guy, but I thought he was a fairly famous actor too. It's really not important, because it's totally sidetracked in the beginning here.
But no, I mean, I'm looking at the cast, and it's Stephen Baldwin, it's Chaz Palminteri, it's Pete Postlethwaite.
That's who it was.
I think that's who you're talking about. Yeah. Dan Hedaya was in it from Cheers. He was what the hell is his name? Anyway, Giancarlo Esposito, I don't even remember him being in it. He was the bad guy in Breaking Bad. And he's an amazing actor. That was probably one of his first like big roles ever. But it's just, like you said, it's the band thing. You've got this ensemble that Spacey was crucial to, but it wasn't his movie alone.
Right.
And that's why, frankly, I'm sure I will watch that movie again, but it, I won't be able to watch it the same way.
Right.
And just like I can't listen to a Whiskey Town song without kind of thinking, maybe, and maybe, I shouldn't be listening to this. There's just that little nagging part of it. And I do listen to Whiskey Town, where, as I mentioned in the blog, which is, we should say is on the website, was dropped roughly a week ago. In that article, I talk about, listening to just what you said, listening to a band because there are other people involved. You don't want to punish them, but it never takes away a little bit of that sting. And you're like, I used to love it more before, that kind of thing.
And I will definitely talk about this in a little bit with one of my recommendations, where you do know about it after the fact and then you watch and I don't know, I mean, I'll get into it then, but it will be interesting to see how I react. Because when I watched that movie, when I learned to love it, I had no idea. He just seemed like
Right.
you'd see interviews with him. I mean, I don't know how you would discern someone's as nasty, and just such a, as you said, piece of shit that he is. But I've not seen it since all this stuff came out, and it will be curious. And I've seen the movie multiple times after knowing what the big surprise is, and none of that.
That's just it. It's in one way, it's a movie that you'll never watch the same way again anyway,
right?
Because of the huge twist that is at the end of the movie. But this is a different reason, and definitely the book that I'm going to recommend refers to a stain that's left afterwards. Even if you want to appreciate the technical proficiency or the artistry or the sheer talent of whoever the artist is, there's still a stain that you can't just remove. It's like spilling red wine on a white carpet. It's still, even if you clean it, it's still there, and it'll always have some effect on your enjoyment of whatever the art is.
Okay.
Actually, I was going to change the subject. I was going to say he's not. You mentioned, there's so many in music that are to greater or lesser degrees create the same problem that we both have with Spacey, and in particular with The Usual Suspects. But you think about all the different musicians, many preceding Ryan Adams by decades, and it makes it hard sometimes to pick your way through what you feel like you're comfortable listening to or not, and who, as you said, you're rewarding. Like, I don't particularly want to give money to somebody who is treating people poorly.
Yeah, and I wonder if as males, as men, we are a little more quick to forgive, or at least justify. Would it be more difficult, especially for someone who had either gone through or knew someone really close who went through something? Because the lasting stain is not only on those who watch, but I mean the scars that, I think sometimes we don't always think about the victims. In Kevin Spacey's case, we don't always know them because they were younger and kept out of the news.
Mm-hmm.
And they often are kept out of the news in these types of situations. Others aren't. They will go public with stuff, and some of those don't always pan out, or that's the question, is we don't know if some deal was made behind the scenes just to make it go away, or what the deal is. And it's tough. This is a really, really difficult terrain to navigate, I think.
I agree. And, one of the first artists that I remember specifically struggling with on that was Michael Jackson, who is, probably comes first to a lot of people's minds when you talk about musicians with, a stain. I mean, Michael Jackson, the Jackson 5, the Jacksons, then Michael in his solo career. Obviously, he was the king of pop and just ruled radio airwaves through most of our childhood. And I didn't love Michael Jackson at that time, but he was everywhere. You listen to his music whether you wanted to or not, and if you go back and listen to his music, you realize just how crazy talented he was. But then, of course, he was also, criminally accused of molestation. He was acquitted, but then more accusations. There's famous people who have accused him. There's not famous people that have accused him. To my knowledge, he was never found guilty in either a criminal or a civil action. So, you have to be careful, and, I probably use the TV or the radio approach of saying alleged, but again, there's so many accusations. And let's face it, he was weird anyway and got weirder the older he got. So it's easy to believe that he would also do horrible things along with just strange things. But he was one of the first giant stars or giant artists that I was aware of was not a good person in at least some form. But that preceded him too. Chuck Berry was accused of all kinds of horrible things, and Jerry Lee Lewis. Those are, we're talking about the 50s and even I'm sure the 40s too, but 50s into the 60s they were accused of similar things. And those, they're amazing musicians, and like you said, a lot of those things, like I kind of discovered Chuck Berry and Jerry Lee Lewis after I was out of law school, when I was reaching back and kind of finding the sources for a lot of the artists that I really like. And then you listen to their music and you're like, holy shit, no wonder these guys are considered to be legends. But I didn't know about all of those accusations until, after I kind of fell in love with the music. And that's the hard part for me, is then now what do you do? I know I like this stuff because I listen to it. Now what do I do?
Right. I think Michael Jackson is the same for me. I certainly have listened to a lot of artists who've had struggles, and with, I guess, mental struggles probably, where they've taken their own lives or whatever. But I wasn't aware of a lot. And I think one of the things that's interesting is we're in a different era where now we know about all this stuff much more quickly, because there's a couple things going on. One, the news back in the day would keep things not hidden, but in the right situation, they didn't expose certain things. I mean, this comes up about JFK's presidency, whether he did or didn't do stuff. It was just not seen as something you would do, to expose something like that. Very, very different all the way up to, like, Clinton. I mean, they couldn't expose it fast enough. And now it's even more so, because everything is out there. The harder part is trying to figure out what's true and what's not true. I'm not dismissing any of these, but you could start to see something going a little different with him, just even in his music and his appearance. But this stuff was certainly circling around him for a long time. But others, I feel like a lot of this stuff didn't come out till later. And I mean, I'll talk about it. I had a similar experience with James Brown, where I certainly knew James Brown. It's funny because of course, knew him and his songs, but he sort of became a spoof of himself with Eddie Murphy's character of him. And then, of course, even later, and I'll talk about it with this documentary I saw that really got me into him. And then it was only afterwards that you find out a decent, similar type of accusations with kidnapping charges and other stuff, which was, so it's the same thing. You dig deep and you're like, oh crap. Then now what I do? Still listen to him. And I don't know if there's anything, as a historian by training, I mean, I've always said to judge things in context. I mean, what was held back then, from certain artists, and what was put forward, either true or not true, to possibly damage some artists. And there certainly could have been race involved in some of these things over the years. I'm not saying to diminish if these things did happen, but all I'm saying is that if there were white artists who were famous, it's possible that some of this stuff wouldn't have come forward back then in the 50s and 60s, when they were more apt to protect certain celebrities. So I don't know. It may be more. This is one of those ones where you tiptoe, because I never want to diminish if anyone truly suffered at the hands of any of these artists.
And the problem is, there's awful people that will make up accusations if they think they can make a buck too. And you balance that out. And usually it comes about, like, it's usually when there are so many accusations. And of course, that's what Me Too became, right? Particularly against individuals. Michael Jackson's a great example of just more and more people step forward and said, yeah, this happened to me too. But it's unfortunate that I just wish that all these people were just untalented, and it would make everything a lot easier. I hate the fact that, for example, I haven't watched the Woody Allen movie in 15 years because he's fucking hilarious. And he was incredibly gifted writer and director, but he also he's, there's something wrong with him, right? I mean, and unfortunately those may be dual things, right? Sometimes that the best art comes from, dark places. And I don't know, it confuses everything about the process as far as I'm concerned. It certainly calls for, a much deeper study than I think we're capable of doing in a silly podcast. But, as I said, I've got a recommendation for a book. I think you've got a recommendation for a documentary, people who are more qualified than us maybe to point out other aspects of the problem. But it's not going away, I guess. We're going to find out about more people. It's like you said, there's people out there right now that we like to listen to, and we're going to find out that hopefully we'll just find out they're an asshole and not like a criminal or someone who's abusing people. I can deal with assholes. That's okay, I suppose. But
yeah, we've been friends for a long time.
Yeah, exactly. I think we're both okay with assholes in that.
So we have reached we've reached the point in the podcast, everybody's favorite segment, listener question. I understand we have a question from a listener that begs answering.
We do have a question from a listener. Let me double check his first name. We got Jonathan writing in from Love Ladies, New Jersey, with a very pressing question, very timely. What is the most difficult piece of pop culture you've removed from your life because the creator was an asshole? God, I hope it doesn't happen to our podcast.
Yes, we may have already been removed. So would you like to address this one first?
Yeah, why don't I start? Because you and I chatted about this yesterday, and you got a better answer than I do. So mine wasn't the hardest, because I can't say that I've gone back and been like, damn, I wish I was watching that show still. But I think it was one of the most shocking, I suppose, is a way to put it. And it does ruin a lot of great memories that you and I had, and then all the way back to when I was a kid. And it's Bill Cosby. He's an obvious one. I struggled with finding something that wasn't so obvious, but some of the stuff that Cosby was accused of doing is just horrendous. I mean, the drugging of women and obviously he spent time in jail. He's paying for his crimes, fortunately. What is so shocking is the difference, the divergence from the perception of him. I mean, he was like the funny, wholesome dad. And his comedy, like you go back, my dad must have had them. I listened to Bill Cosby comedy albums when I was a kid. So you're talking back in the 70s and 80s. And his stuff was so funny and so wholesome. I mean, it was no curse words. Nowadays we talk about guys like Brian Regan who managed to stay clean. Bill Cosby was that original artist, in contradiction to folks like Richard Pryor, who were equally funny, but much dirtier. So it's just, and then up to the times when you and I were in college, some of my favorite and funniest moments when we weren't out drinking, was sitting at the house and watching the Cosby Show, which was, groundbreaking and hilarious. And we didn't have always the most racially tolerant brothers. And some of them would sit down there and watch it just as much and laugh their asses off. And it was a great show. And then when all this stuff came out afterwards, and I hate to disparage names after they've passed, but like Michael Jackson, he always had some sort of weird thing to him. You may not have been shocked about, when that stuff came out, but for Cosby, I think it was shocking to us, like probably to the Hollywood scene who knew what was going on. You always hear these things, these rumblings, maybe not, but to me, it came out of nowhere. And I've not purposely not gone back and watched the Cosby Show. It hasn't been on, and I've not seen it in a long, long time, but it has ruined a lot of really great memories.
You're right. That was such a big surprise to me when that all came out. And he's another one of those fixtures of our early life, and even before the Cosby Show, he was famous, and he was so funny. Like you said, his stand-up was legend. He was groundbreaking in the entertainment business anyway, and I can't think of the name of the series, but he was a co-star. He was like the first Black co-star
Yep.
of a network TV show with, I want to say it was like Robert Culp or something. It was like a kind of a funny buddy detective show. For the life of me, I can't remember the name of it. And it was really before my time, in the sense that I saw it, but only on syndication. It was one of those shows that would, you know, would be on at like 4 o'clock when you get home from school, when you were in grade school or whatever. So, you know, it came out in the early 60s, and it was unheard of to have a Black man leading any kind of, you know, show in that way. And he was, you know, if you've ever watched an episode of it, and I watched a couple, he was great. And he was so funny all the way around. And then to learn that he was diabolical. It was, you know, it wasn't just being an asshole in that case. It was being a criminal. And you wonder, a guy like that, who it seemed like he had everything anyway.
Right.
What kind of personality do you have? What kind of mindset do you have that you have to drug women who
Right.
all you have to do is, you know, walk into a bar. I'm sure there's, you know, 5 women that would, you know, be happy to hang out with you. But I agree with you. And I haven't watched the Cosby Show in ages, and didn't really have an inclination even before I found out about everything about him. But I absolutely agree that it was, you know, it was part of those, you know, back before streaming, it was appointment television that everybody watched. I mean, it was the highest rated show, and, you know, it was a family that even a, you know, middle class, you know, white kid, you know, like, you wanted him to be your dad. You wanted to be in that family. And you know, I think that, again, groundbreaking in its own way, but that is disappointing. So my response to Jonathan's question is more recent, and for me, more painful than losing the ability to watch reruns of the Cosby Show or putting commercials. And it's the comedian Louis C.K.
Yep.
Louis C.K. was anyway, one of the funniest people I've ever seen do stand-up. He has a sensibility and a presentation in his stand-up that I just identified with, loved. He made me laugh so much. He had a couple short-lived TV shows where he took on the form of the situation comedy and kind of turned it on its head. I loved the show Louis, which came out in 2010. I think it only lasted a season or two, like a short season, or maybe 2 short seasons. But his stand-up, I used to listen to a lot of stand-up, you know, albums, cassettes, whatever, you know, we used to listen to before there was the internet. And he was so funny. And he's another guy who's, I think that his behavior and his treatment of women maybe only bordered on criminal. I don't think he was ever charged with a crime for what he did. But he clearly had difficulties dealing with women, and he clearly used positions of power, whether it was on a sitcom or just in general as you know, kind of a famous comedian, to mistreat women in you know, in his relationships in general. And I haven't listened to any of his. He's still out there. He's still touring. I think he still does okay. I know he's had some specials, comedy specials out there. I know he's put out albums of his stand-up, and I've intentionally not listened to them or watched them. And that probably hurts me more than almost any other artist I can think of, just because I would wait for the new album to come out and I would listen to it. Like, it was like waiting for your favorite musician, your favorite band to put out an album. You know, you'd wait for that day and you'd be like, hey, have you listened to the new Louis C.K.? And I haven't done it. And I get the impression, just from some articles and other things I've read, that I don't know, he admitted the things that he did, but I'm not sure that there was a whole lot of remorse about it. And again, part of that's just his personality and his style. He's a dark guy anyway, and I'm sure he has issues with depression and what have you. So maybe it's the only way he can address it. I miss him. That's, I guess, how I'll leave it, is I really miss listening to his comedy, because I always thought he was just great.
Yeah, he has a couple routines that I have like almost memorized, like the Pig Newton one with his daughter when she mispronounces him as Pig Newton. And then also the one where he takes his daughter out and finds that like amazing field of wild horses, and she asks if she can go up and pet him, and they bite her. And then she's like, "Why did you let me pet him?" It's like, ponies are assholes. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I got my favorite all
I think I'm
time.
violating. I think I'm
I know,
violating the fact
that's the problem. But this is, I heard it. It's in my head. I can't get rid of it. You know, my favorite was when he talked about he had pain in his knee, and he went to talk to a doctor. And he says, and the doctor gave me this list of exercises to do, and I said, okay, well, how long do I have to do that? And the doctor's like, no, you don't understand. That's what you do now. He was so good at capturing being middle-aged before
Yeah.
I'd even hit some of those steps. Now I look back and I'm like, yeah, he was dead on. I'm not sure it was comedy at all. It was just autobiography.
Yeah.
But the next segment we'll move on to is our recommendations. Longtime listeners will know that we like to make a recommendation from then. What we define as then is pre-2000, and then a recommendation from now, which is 2000 or later. What we try to do is recommend some type of piece of pop culture that relates to the theme or the topic that we're discussing in the podcast. And my recommendation for then, discussing problematic artists, or as I said in my in the article, artists we love to hate, or no, I got it backwards. Artists we hate to love. And mine, I mentioned them, I think, real briefly earlier, but my recommendation is the movie Annie Hall from 1977, which was written and directed by Woody Allen. And many people consider Woody Allen a genius as a director and a writer. And a comedian, as far as that goes. And I would have to probably agree with that. But he is one of those people that I just kind of stopped. And he's not, he does create new films. He's still making films. The guy's, 1,000 years old, and he still puts out a film a year pretty much. But I haven't seen one since the allegations came out. And part of that's because of the allegations. Part of it's because I think he's lost a little bit, in terms of his creative output. But if you're willing to listen to him, despite what you know about his personal life, Annie Hall is considered one of his, if not his magnum opus. It's considered one of his best films ever. It has one of the best lines in a movie I've ever heard. I'm not the first person to point out how classic this line is, but at the point where he's breaking up with Diane Keaton, and he says to Annie, to Diane Keaton's character, he says, a relationship, I think, is like a shark, it has to constantly move forward or it dies. And I think what we got on our hands here is a dead shark. And the first time I saw it, I laughed. Every single time I saw him after that, I laughed. And if I watch the movie again today, I'm sure I would laugh at just the line, his delivery. It's a funny movie. So if you can stomach it, if you can handle Woody Allen, then Annie Hall is what you should watch.
Yeah, you and I we have these divergences in taste, and I never took to Woody Allen. So let's, maybe because I couldn't figure out his name, but I don't even know if I've seen a Woody Allen movie. I think I did try one.
Yeah, I'm surprised you haven't ever seen one. It's I think it's a specific taste. There are people who could care less about his personal history or the allegations against him or anything else, who also don't like Woody Allen because he's like the classic kind of New York, Jewish intellectual type. It is definitely a certain type of humor, but I did, and I do. If those movies are, if I catch a part of that movie, it shows up on TV. I can't say I've watched any recently, but I find him to be a really funny dude.
And I usually like intelligent humor, which takes us to my recommendation, which is actually not overly intelligent, but and I chose it for a very specific reason. I did a lot of things with this. I skirted the then and now. My recommendation, just to cut to the chase, is That 70s Show. And for obvious reasons, probably, it's because of Danny Masterson's involvement in it. The series started in 1998, hence why I'm calling it then. And the first couple seasons were probably the strongest by far. But I just got through watching the entire series like over just a couple months. In the evenings, my wife and I would just sit down and look for something stupid to watch, and it was entertaining. And I knew Masterson's background, but I'd probably seen like it in rerun or something else, but I had never really watched the series, and sort of running out of stuff to watch. And it's really, really funny. I mean, the relationship between Eric and Donna, who's the main, not Masterson. He was funny, but you know what? This is why it's not like we didn't have time to prepare for this.
It's
Kelso,
that's a
married.
Ashton Kutcher's
Yeah, and I think
character.
he's married to, or is still married to, Mila Kunis.
Yes. Yeah.
So there you go. So Ashton Kutcher is my favorite part of the show. But the focus of this one is Danny Masterson. And again, we differentiate between bad behavior and criminal behavior. And his is now at the point of criminal. Several women have assaulted. Several women accused him of assault, and he was found guilty pretty recently, and is I'm not sure if he's officially been sentenced. He may be appealing at this point, but he's going to spend probably the rest of his life in jail. And interesting to go back and watch, because his character was one of the more interesting ones. He's one of those guys that's, too cool for school. But how you see him grow as a character, become a part of the Foreman family, find out about his father, who was Tim Reed, who played Venus Flytrap and WKRP in Cincinnati. That was a great little run.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I missed that part of the show.
Yeah, so I watched every single freaking episode, dude. I'm well versed.
Except for the names of the characters.
Except for names. But I don't even remember my friends' names, so we're good. You're lucky. You're one of the few people. But yeah, but what it was a weird experience watching it, because I didn't want to like him. And then I think at a certain point, it's that same thing. It's an ensemble cast. I think what I wondered throughout that series was how many of those actresses knew of his bad behavior, and how they cover that up, when they're acting with him. I mean, and maybe it wasn't. I don't recall all the details of when he did all this stuff, but in general, this stuff doesn't just come on. I mean, there's indications that someone's bad, because these are bad things that he did.
And they worked together forever. That show
ran
8 years.
for 8 years. So, well into the early 2000s. And then he went on to do another show with Kutcher too, called The Ranch, which I have not seen. But so yeah, I recommend this series as a, fairly brainless but funny reflection on middle America back in the 70s. I understand that they've done a reboot called That 90s Show, which I've not seen. A lot of the same characters. As a lot of those series do, it fizzled out pretty hard at the end. Eric wasn't even in the last season, and they replaced him with one of the most annoying characters I've ever seen in my life. But the show in general, the first 7 seasons are well worth a watch. It wasn't intended to be an experiment, but it's one where I watched knowing the bad behavior and trying to figure out how I felt about it. And I don't know, this is what makes this such a complicated topic. The show itself was good. I tried really hard not to like him, and just tried to like his character.
I will tell you that first of all, he was a very strong character in that show. But it was it was the ultimate example, I think, of an ensemble cast. I mean, everybody had their role in it. They'd have individual episodes that would focus on individual characters, but all in all, hell, half the show was just the however many 5 or 6 of them sitting around, in a basement getting high. I did like that show. I didn't watch it religiously. I did feel like it really did capture my recollection of how the 70s felt anyway, even if didn't have couldn't specifically relate to, a bunch of, white kids growing up in Wisconsin. But it really did, they did a great job as far as the design of the show and the costumes. And it really did feel like it was the 70s. And the Kurtwood Smith, who played Eric Foreman's dad, Red. He was awesome. He was another
He
high
was.
point of that show.
Yeah, he was easily, yeah. Kitty was too.
Mhm.
And in hindsight now, it makes me think a little bit about All in the Family and um, the mother, the wife on that show, and how she was, played as a dingbat, quote unquote, but always had her strong moments. And Kitty had her moments too, where she was, drinking wine a lot and giggling and, sort of that quote unquote dingbat role, but continues to be a stronger character. So it was well done. I agree. And
Yeah,
there
those
were
two,
some really funny moments.
those two in particular, I think, the writers of That '70s Show clearly loved All in the Family, because
Yes.
I really felt that couple, the older couple, Red and Kitty, were, that was an homage, I think,
I
to
think so,
Archie
too.
Bunker and,
Yep.
and Edith.
Edith.
So Edith.
All right.
So those
All
are
right.
our recommendations from then. What do you recommend for now?
I've been criticized for only doing music, so I went out of my way to not do that. And so I had a TV series for then, and for now, I have a documentary called "The Night James Brown Saved Boston," and it's a really well done documentary. I didn't get the sense that it's overly well known. Even the packaging, back when I bought this as a DVD, didn't seem like it was done by any major studio or anything. But the story behind it is, it was after Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated, and there was serious concerns about major rioting in Boston. And they had already had this concert scheduled where James Brown and others were playing, and they're trying to decide if they should cancel it for fear of, getting a lot of people coming out to the concert and being on the streets and potentially adding to the riot that they were anticipating or afraid of. And then the decision was made to publicly broadcast the concert,
Oh,
with the idea of keeping everyone at home. And that concert was just amazing. And the documentary is all about the decision that went into that, the role that James Brown played on that, the amazing performance that he put on, and what was probably just enough to quell the anger, deservedly so, and to not result in a major, major riot in Boston. And that really, I think I probably got more into James Brown because of you. Chuck Berry, James Brown, some of the classics you probably brought to the forefront for me. But that concert really highlights his skill as a performer.
now
Um,
I haven't seen that documentary, and I don't know much about that particular concert. Does the documentary reveal that he addressed those issues when he was on stage at all, or did he just come out and play his set,
No, I think he did. I have to go back and watch it. It's been a while, but it's mainly about the calming effect that has this just amazing musical performance by him. And I do think there's a couple times he talked about it, but I think he generally let his music speak for itself, which
Yeah.
I think was the
That sounds
power
more
of,
like him. Yeah, that's
yeah.
what I still, and you're right about, a quick Google search will reveal a lot of questionable things about James Brown, but I still probably listen to Live at the Apollo every month or two. I'll listen to it all the way through, and I can't imagine what it'd be like to see him perform live. You mentioned earlier in the episode, the problem for me is what, when I listen to his music, if I close my eyes, I kind of see Eddie Murphy getting into a hot tub. And that's not what his performance was. He was just a ball of energy and pretty overwhelming, which is funny to think that would calm people down. But,
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I'm going to watch that documentary. I have not seen that, or in fact, until you put it on our outline, I hadn't even heard of it.
All right. What's your recommendation, Mr. Polachek?
Well, I mentioned it just in brief earlier, and this might bite me in the ass down the line, because I'm going to recommend a book I haven't finished yet. But I've read half of it. The book is called Monsters: A Fan's Dilemma. It's written by Claire Dederer, Dederer. It was published in 2023 by Vintage Books, so it's a very recent book. I've read roughly half of it, and I'm enjoying this woman's perspective on what amounts to being her career as a film critic, and how Me Too and her own personal experience as a woman has affected her love of movies that have been, written, directed by, basically awful people. As I understand it, I read a review of the book early on that said the book itself came out of a magazine article she published or had published somewhere that was titled, "What Do We Do with the Art of Monstrous Men?" She talks a lot about Woody Allen. She talks about other directors, that really, really guided her towards her career as a writer and a film critic. And she does a really good job of describing what we've had a very difficult job doing, describing, which is just how you can love the movies, for example, by Roman Polanski, who is, who she considers to be a genius, knowing of the awful things that he's been accused of, and the fact that he fled the United States, never to return because of those accusations. The chapters I've read so far have dealt primarily with him and with Woody Allen, and Woody Allen to her is one of the funniest, best directors ever, and describes how she's had to maneuver around these problems. And as I mentioned earlier, it is very interesting to read a woman's perspective on these things, because my perspective is very limited in that regard. And I'm looking forward to the end. I may get to the end and completely disagree with her conclusions, but whatever I get out of the book, just her description of how it affects someone in her position, and her place in society and academia and everywhere else. I believe I will be recommending it once I finish it as well. But I wanted to get it done before this, and you would think a 4-week break would have helped me do that. But unfortunately, I didn't finish the book yet. But I do think so far I really, really enjoy it.
Nice job continuing with the pre-facto theme for this one. Recommending before you finish it.
Yeah, exactly.
That's okay, because I've recommended things that I haven't watched in 20 years, and actually that is a nice segue into our next segment.
It's a mistake. It's a mistake.
Which is usually filled with far more incidents, but our post facto, this opening episode relates to not really a mistake so much, unless you want to call the fact that I recommended a movie that I had never seen a mistake, because I think Tom went back and watched it, and you might have a post facto for us. What is that?
I went and watched The Cincinnati Kid. I believe you recommended Cincinnati Kid as part of our last episode of the second season, right? I believe it was the 10th episode. Maybe it was the 9th episode.
It might have been the 9th, I think.
But you recommended a movie called Cincinnati Kid with Paul Newman, about a card player who gets involved in a high stakes game, and there's lots of intrigue and there's great acting, and it is an enjoyable movie to watch. But there is I don't know, it felt like a 20-minute scene. It was probably about a 6 or 7 minute scene of a cockfight in the middle of that movie. And what's the beautiful woman who was like the femme fatale in the movie?
Anne Margaret.
Anne Margaret. She plays this temptress, kind of classic femme fatale, as I said. But in the cockfight scene, she's the most bloodthirsty thing I've ever seen. And I think what you're supposed to get from that scene is that by the time the cockfight is over, she is so hot she wants to jump Paul Newman's bones, like in the bathroom of this place. It was the craziest scene I've ever seen. And the only post facto is I want to point out, you didn't say anything about that scene. It was absolutely insane that there was literally, you saw the beginning, the middle, and the end of a cockfight in the middle of this movie.
I read the hell about that movie, but I think I saw it when I was a kid, because it's what, from the 50s. I mean, it's a 50s.
Yeah, and you mentioned that you watched it when you were a kid because because it said Cincinnati in
Yeah,
it.
exactly. But
Oh
I
my
must have
God.
blocked out the cockfight, but
And again, I would tell you that it's it's not Paul Newman. I said Paul Newman, it's Steve McQueen.
oh yeah, yeah.
And that was the other thing, because you are a Steve McQueen fan, and I was like, well, I'm gonna watch this thing, and he's great in it, and it does remind me a lot of The Hustler, which is a movie with Paul Newman. That's why I got that confused.
Yeah.
Where it's the same kind of deal. There's a mentor, and there's a kid who's great, a young guy who's up and coming in a rough pastime. One was pool, and Cincinnati Kid was poker. He's fantastic in it. And the acting is great, but man, after the cockfight scene, I kind of couldn't focus for a while because I was just like, they put that in a movie? Like, I don't even know. I don't get the connection to the rest of the film. It was just like, hey, we got a couple chickens. Let's put them in a ring and see what happens.
I think it might have been, hey, we got Anne Margaret. Let's figure out
Yeah,
some
well,
way to.
Yeah, she was like at the cockfight wearing a cocktail dress, so it was all a little incongruous, I think. But
Yeah.
I felt that was a good post facto for our first episode of the season.
I like it. And I keep sitting there. It's funny because during these episodes, I'm like, all right, what have we screwed up on? And then you corrected the Paul Newman, because those two shows get compared a lot. Like even when I was doing my
Do they?
search.
Yeah, it makes sense
So,
to me
yeah.
because I do find I found them to be very similar.
All right. So for each of our seasons, we do a playlist and we put it on all the various streaming services, Spotify, YouTube, Apple, and Amazon.
Yes.
And for those, we try to make recommendations, one, relevant to the episode. And two, we try to be not obscure, but try to find stuff that might not be as obvious as it could be. And we succeed in that to varying degrees. Every once in a while, we'll have a playlist episode where we might have 3 or 4 or 5 songs that we include. But in general, we have one song that we add to the playlist each week, which results in roughly 20 to 28 song playlist. So with this episode, we will start our third playlist, and I'm going to turn it to Mr. Polachek to make his playlist recommendation for this week.
Oh, I was torn on this. I have 2 great recommendations for the playlist.
What? You have 2 choices?
It's so crazy.
You're going to tell us about both of them?
I'm not. All I'm going to tell you about the one I'm not going to use is the only reason I'm not using it is because it feels to me like it's your song. We've talked about this in the past when we talked about rules for making playlists, and I didn't know about this band until you put a song by the band. Actually, I think he's a solo performer, but he's got the name sounds like a band. I love this song. I think I may recommend it later for something else, so I'm keeping it to myself.
No, you bastard.
But I got to give you credit because I listen to this band all the time because you put one song on a playlist. But I'm going to go with one that I know you know about, but I think only because I put him on a playlist way back when. And I'm going to go with the song Some Hearts by Hamill on Trial. This is another performer whose performance name sounds like a band, but it's just one guy. His name is Ed Hamill. I don't even know if this song is on, if there's a studio version of it, but the version I love is from an album called Ed's Not Dead, Hamill Comes Alive from 2001. And it is a live album recorded when he was an opening act for, and he mentions it in the album, and now I'm drawing a blank. Anyway, but they recorded it for him and he issued it as an album. And this song is just beautiful. He tells a story and it's on the live album. And I think that contributes to how much I like the song. He tells the story about why he wrote the song. And I won't even try to explain it because it's really crazy and, very possibly could have been made up, but it's very touching. The song is beautiful. He's kind of a punk performer, but this is as close to a ballad, I would say, that he gets. The reason that I'm recommending it is he once played at Chicago Street Pub in Joliet, Illinois, and a friend of mine opened up for him. And I knew of Hamill on Trial, didn't get down to see, or no, I take it back. that's what the first time I saw him was when my friend John opened up for him. And I immediately went out and downloaded this album, Ed's Not Dead, loved it. And it was probably weeks later that I saw my friend John, and I was like, hey, man, I saw you play and I saw you open up for Hamel on Trial. Really liked that guy. I thought he was really funny because he's one of those performers that got lots of stories, and he was up there by himself. And I said that to John. I was like, I bought his album. I thought it was really good. What do you think of that guy? He's like, oh, he was a fucking asshole. And this Ed Hamel's, he's from New York. Apparently he treated everybody like shit. Like they don't really have a green room at Chicago Street Pub, like they were just like in the kitchen or something like that. And John my friend John's like the friendliest guy in the world, most amiable guy in the world. And for him to say somebody's an asshole, that guy is definitely an asshole. So he's fantastic. I don't think he's ever done anything as bad as some of the stuff we've talked about, but apparently he's prickly as hell and just treated, my friend like a douchebag. So that's why I'm recommending a beautiful song by a guy who apparently is just a prick.
Nice. I like it. So I went in a totally different direction, and I had a backup song too, but I didn't think about it too much. The one, I don't think I would use this one in the future, and I didn't choose it. It was the Steve Earle song, More Than I Can Do. And it seems like it's a little bit of a, you're trying to break up with me, but I'm not done, so I'm going to keep stalking you type of song. It seems like it highlights that bad behavior. But instead, and I want to be very clear that I do not have any indication at all that this band is assholes. In fact, I think it's the opposite. But I chose a Drive-By Trucker song, What It Means, which is one of my favorite songs by them ever. It's part of their move to far more political songs. Their songs have always been political through the personal type of stuff, talking about the South and Leonard Skinner, for example, their concept album. But this one has a specific reference that as soon as we started talking about this topic, it came to my mind, and I've been playing the song over and over again. What It Means is largely focused on current times, a lot of racial issues. Opens up with a Black kid who was just walking down the street, was shot in the back, and basically says, if you don't think it was racial, then you must not be Black. I mean, it's a very, very powerful song dealing with our current racial struggles as a nation. But it goes deeper than that, talking about the anti-science movement and everything else. And but the line that sticks with me is right near the end, and it's and our heroes may be rapists who watch us while we dream, but don't look to me for answers because we don't know what it means. And
That's good.
it's just a great ending to a great song, and it is true. I mean, we have problems. These people of power, and I think that's part of it. I understand, like Ryan Adams, which again is dealt with really nicely by Tom on his blog, got into a position of power where he was a very influential artist and took advantage of it and put female artists especially in a very, very bad position. And it happens throughout. We have multiple examples, and I just thought What It Means was a nice way to end this episode on a touchy topic. And it was difficult for both of us, recognizing up front that we are men, and I think that's why I look forward to how that book ends, Tom. Hopefully it ends on a note that you agree with. And I want to one more time put it out there that even though I don't listen to a lot of female artists, I do not think I'm a misogynist. I'm just putting it out there.
And we will ask the female artists their
Yes.
opinion next episode.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'm hopeful that my post facto for the next episode, I will have finally finished this book. My problem is that I keep finding books in between, and I keep reading other
Yeah.
books. But I will report back and let you know. But as I said before, I don't think my recommendation will change, just because I think she's got a great ability to clearly describe what is a very murky thing for everybody, not just you and me, but I think everybody who loves music, loves movies, loves books.
And I think the purpose of this, we're not saying that we're coming out with a definitive approach or statement on these problematic artists. It's just really to get people to think about it. And that's with the 70s show, I don't know if, me enjoying the show so much, what that says about me, but it really got me thinking about these issues more. And that's ultimately what we want people to take away from this episode.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, that kind of that's a very nice segue into talking a little bit about the podcast and our website. If you have any thoughts, recommendations, or responses to anything that we've talked about in this episode or any of the episodes in the future, you can email us at thirdsongin@gmail.com. We'd love to get some feedback. We'd like to talk about it on the podcast itself. That would probably be part of post facto if somebody has something to say, or if they have what they think is a more cogent way to address these problems that we've described without really providing any solution, frankly. So you can email us at thirdsongin@gmail.com. You can find us at www.thirdsonginpodcast.com. We have that website has been up and running for a few months now.
Yeah.
It contains an episode spotlight where Chris usually finds, generally, I would say they're the YouTube clips that relate to stuff we've either recommended or talked about. We try to list our recommendations, in particular those. We both forgot. We didn't give our egg burritos with sour cream recommendations for our then and now. And that is absolutely necessary. I know our listeners must know where we rate this pop culture. So let's go back for a second. I would say that for me, and these are harder, right? Because these are people that at least in my case, somebody who's I don't think a whole lot of, but I would say that Annie Hall is a 5 out of 5 recommendation. And that's based not on the person. It is based on the art. I don't think much of Woody Allen. Don't think I'd want to spend any time with him, but that movie is absolutely, it is practically flawless as a comedy, or at least a New York City intellectual comedy, maybe is the best way to put it. But I would give that a 5 out of 5, which means that it will show up on our website and our recommendations page.
Yeah, and I'm still thinking we might have more than just a 5 out of 5. You and I got to chat about how we revise that, but for sure the 5 out of 5s will this week. For That 70s Show, I mean, I'd give it a 3 out of 5. I think it's a good, solid show. It was chosen mainly for the topic of watching a show after because so many of these, I think that's what I didn't highlight enough, is so many of these actors or musicians we've tended to find out after the fact. And then it goes back to how you react, whereas it's not often about these people being total assholes, and watching them and having the opportunity to think more about the issues when you do so. So that's why I chose that one. It's a good solid. It's funny. It has some really, really funny moments, and then it ends really poorly. So just like a lot of those those sitcoms.
Yeah. The format is difficult to be too deep, I think. And just because this is the first episode of the season, when we say 5 out of 5 or 3 out of 5, we are referring, of course, to our famous egg burritos with sour cream rating method. If you want to know a little bit more about that, I would go back to season 1, and I think we discuss it sometime in episode 2 or 3.
Yeah.
But for us, an almost perfect piece of art, whether it's film, book, or otherwise, would be 5 out of 5. Egg burritos with sour cream, our favorite midnight food back when we were in college in the 80s.
Midnight would have been early.
Yeah, that's true. That's very true. And then I am going to. This will be our first incomplete. I'm gonna give a question mark rating for egg burritos with sour cream for Monsters: A Fan's Dilemma, and I will report back and let you know what I think of the book when I've finished the whole thing, as opposed to giving a rating and then using it in post facto. Either way, it'll show up in post facto.
Yeah, and I'm gonna go 5 out of 5 with the night James Brown saved Boston, for both the content, which I think is great, and it's not an overly obvious one. I think it's well worth seeking out. And I love those shows that don't seem to have a lot of budget, and they put together just a really important and powerful piece of art.
Yep, that one is definitely now on my list. I'll put you on the spot. Do you know where it might be found right now?
No, I know it's up in my closet.
All right.
On a
Well, and I'll be over there.
DVD.
Make some popcorn, and I'm coming over to watch it.
Sounds good.
So we were in the middle of talking about the website. You got anything to add to that?
No, other than the fact that you can also message us to the website, and those goes into an inbox. We use GoDaddy as our hosting service. It's been a nice service for us. I think the main thing that I wanted to talk about is, as the NFL draft has occurred, and there's all this talk about, the schedule being released and everything. My big hope is that for season 4, possibly, that the website's colors change to orange and black.
You
'Cause we
realize that
currently
I believe the season finale football
it is.
game. Except I don't know where they play. Is it Cincy or Pittsburgh?
I think the finale is in Cincy, but I could be
Yeah,
wrong.
I think you might be right. They said that the Steelers' last 8 games is like the hardest
Oh yeah.
final 8 that anybody will play next season. And I know we finish up with the Bengals. I just wasn't sure if it was home or away.
Yeah, so that game has added gravity because it could possibly decide the color scheme of our website.
Yeah, you're right. It's very likely that, in fact, we should probably talk a little bit more. Is it overall record or conference record, or I think
it's overall record.
Yeah, I think that's what we base it on this time anyway, this last
It didn't
time.
matter this last time because you had both, but
Oh, that's right.
and
That's right.
actually I
We did-
looked, the last game is in Pittsburgh.
Oh, okay, cool. Well, also, one of the other aspects to the website is that we do have a blog page. I think, what is it? It's called Words and Pictures. Is that right?
Yeah.
We should know this.
Yeah,
It's-
Words and Pictures. It used to be called Pictures and Words, but we wanted the blog to be at the top.
Yes. So
There you go.
we are posting once a week, hopefully on Thursdays. We're posting either articles by Chris, articles by me, or potentially articles from what we call the archive, which is basically just shit I wrote like 20 years ago. But there is a brand new article that went up last Thursday that deals with the issues we've talked about here today. And what we put up next week is a surprise because, frankly, we don't even know.
Have no idea.
And then finally, we would like you, please, if you can follow us wherever you listen or are listening to this podcast, please rate us, give us as many stars as you can, regardless of what podcast platform you're using. Rate and review or follow our playlist, which you can find on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, YouTube Music. The podcast is, again, everywhere: Apple Podcast, YouTube, Spotify, etc. We are still in the process of figuring out what new editing software we're going to use. I'm starting to get into panic mode, but we're going to figure it out. And we have to change everything by the end of this month of May. And I'm sure we'll get it going. And we plan to drop every Monday unless circumstances prevent us.
We will do it. Well, thank you for joining us. We look forward to season 3. A whole new list of topics, songs, blogs, everything that goes with this podcast. And we appreciate you listening to us.
You've been listening to Third Song In with Chris and Tom. Thanks for listening. We've had 1,000 plays, for Christ's sake.
Not a one time. It's like, I thought this was open 24 hours, not in a row. Something you just did closed out a lot of background noise.
Yeah. Well, I killed 3 people.